Welcome back to another edition of Political Breakfast on WABE. I'm your host, Lisa Rayam. With me today are our strategists, Republican strategist Brian Robinson and Democratic strategist Tharon Johnson. Hello to both of you. Good to see you this week.
Good to see you, and happy Mother's Day to you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Happy Mother's Day to your mom, Tharon, to your wife, China, to my mom, Paula Robinson, and to my wife, Karina.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know you all treated your mothers in the household well, didn't you?
Go ahead, B-Rob, because you had an anniversary, too.
Well, it was the anniversary of our engagement, 10 years, and it was Karina's birthday on Sunday, and it was Mother's Day, so she'll be getting a medical spa appointment paid for tomorrow for the treatment of her wish, whatever that may be.
Well, Karina, just so you know, B-Rob, we were together on Friday, and he did pre-plan. He knew it was coming up. But Lisa, Mother's Day is really, really special for me because it's just really a time of reflection. And so, it was really funny. My mom, I talk about her all the time, not really being that savvy on the internet, but was really sitting down with her and, let her listen to the podcast and let her see some reels on Instagram. And she definitely was happy. And just, again, shout out to all the moms out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The weather was beautiful, too, this past weekend, wasn't it?
It really was nice.
Absolutely, absolutely gorgeous. Well, this show is going to be made up of a couple of snippets. And what I mean by that are snippets that developed over the course of the week, but remain pretty relevant in the scheme of Georgia politics. And first, I want you guys to address, if you will, Marjorie Taylor Greene. It was a tough week for her in that House Republicans did not side with her in her effort, in her power grab, I guess some were calling it, in her attempt to oust Speaker Mike Johnson. Where does she stand now? Very vocal going into this, very confident going into this, very adamant, about this effort. And then it went kaput. Will her star fade? Tharon, is it time for her star to fade?
As they say in the legislature, I relinquish some of my time to the gentleman from Brookhaven. But no, Lisa. I mean, look, B-Rob can take us behind the scenes a little bit more. I'm sure he's definitely been saying this for weeks that there was some resistance out there. We just, for the first time, Lisa and Brian, actually saw it in action. You saw the congressional delegation on the Republican side sort of speak out. And look, I'll give the Democratic perspective. I think that, our leader, Hakeem Jeffries, the gentleman from New York, who is the minority leader in the House, is playing chess. And Democrats, while we want to hold Republicans accountable, but we're about governing. And I think that my partisan shot here would be that if you just look at how the Republican House members under this leadership and previous leaderships of speakers have not been able to really govern. So I think the Democratic stance is this, Lisa. Let the Marjorie Taylor Greene supporters and her followers and continue to empower her. I heard this on a podcast recently this weekend. They were saying that it used to be about collaboration and figuring out how you can reach across the aisle and get things done and finding a common ground. Now it's all about amplification and actually monetizing your amplification, right? So what Marjorie Taylor Greene has done and other Republicans is that they just amplify the radical rhetoric from the right and to try to oust a member of her own party as speaker. I don't think it's over. I think she will continue to try to do it. But shout out to the Democrats for playing chess and trying to really support this current speaker to make sure that the American people know that we're trying to govern.
Well, no time was wasted voting down her attempt to oust Speaker Johnson. So Brian, I'll ask you the same thing. Will her star fade after this? Is it time for it to fade?
I'm hoping that what we see is a consensus of a broad cross-section of the U.S. House that is interested in governing. And I think you saw a bipartisan commitment to governing in voting down that motion from Representative Greene. I am disappointed that one of the Democrats in our delegation, Nikema Williams, who's also the state Democratic Party chair, voted with Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? So when we talk about governing, let's take both sides, because the responsible vote for governing was to table that motion. And most of the Democrats in Georgia did, but not the one who happens to be the Democratic Party chair here in this state. I do think that we've seen a turn happen. people in the GOP conference haven't wanted to go out and attack one of their own. They've been sort of forced to it. And what you saw coming down out of the House as the members were leaving, walking down the steps of the Capitol, they stopped and did news conferences, and they used really tough language, basically saying that she is a child, saying that this was dumb. It wasn't those words exactly, but you didn't have to scratch deep into their comments to get to that's what they were saying. And if this consensus can hold, and I'm not sure that it can marginalize the extremes of both parties. Because look, if the Democrats have a narrow majority in 2025, or if the Republicans do, that still enables the extreme elements of both caucuses, or of either caucus, I should say. So I hope that there can be this centrist coming together that holds after this, so that we can begin to move things forward. There was this small subset of Republicans who are keeping Speaker Johnson from bringing the Ukraine and Israel aid to the floor, and the consensus of the House prevailed. And what we saw is that once it's allowed to get on the floor, it's not even close. The vast majority of House members of both parties support this. And when we have those things, what do Americans say all the time? They say it to me and Tharon all the time. Tharon and I we had a speaking event on Friday. Shout out to the Kettering Business Network at the Buckhead Club for having us. But what always comes up when we speak to groups is, why can't people work together and across party lines to achieve items of public interest that have a consensus of support? We saw that in this vote. Can it hold? For the sake of America, I hope it does.
Well, Tharon, getting back to Nikema Williams, I know you can't speak for her, but what do you think the strategy was behind her move there?
I don't know. And B-Rob, remind me now. So she, I didn't know that. So that's the first time, in a long time that I missed something. So she actually voted against tabling?
Yes, she voted with Marjorie Taylor Greene, in essence, yes.
That's a question I think that the Congresswoman has got to answer. But I do know that the majority of the Democratic Party, from folks that I talked to, like Stephen Horsford, who's a good alpha man who represents a congressional district in Nevada. Now, he's also the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, basically saying this exactly to me, Lisa. We as Democrats, we still can basically support Speaker Mike Johnson in his attempt to bring some sense of levity and stability to the House, but also while they do support his sort of attempt and sort of respect of wanting to actually govern, they still are worried about what B-Rob just talked about, which is that we want to win back the House. We believe that we can win this back. And so if that happens, you still got to be able to have some good relationships on the other side of the aisle. But, I think the thing that was really interesting to me, and maybe Brian knows the answer to this question or not, something happened, Lisa, because Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Congresswoman, has had a lot of rope. I mean, she has been out here for years, just being very, very critical, very outspoken. And so I don't know if it's something in the water in Washington that people are drinking. Maybe it's, it's the climate, the air is getting better, it's less pollution, but something triggered the Republicans to finally have the sense of courage and the sense of just plain decency to speak out against a member of their delegation that has been pretty critical of the speaker.
So both of you are in agreement that Marjorie Taylor Greene is not going anywhere, that she's sticking around.
Well, one thing that she said on the Steve Bannon podcast was, even if I lose this motion, this is before she did this last week, it's just going to cause me to raise more money because it's going to rally all these Americans who agree with me to donate to my campaign. And that has become an end unto itself, not just for her. I think it's a testament to what's happening in Congress today. Tharon alluded to that. And that's just a really dangerous place. And I think that what gives me hope here is what we saw with this consensus of the House movement that we've seen in recent weeks on the Ukraine funding and on preserving Speaker Johnson's office is just enough. And who else said that? Governor Kemp, somebody who has no interest for the most part in Washington politics and tries to stay out of it. He weighed in and said, I support Speaker Johnson. Enough is enough. He is somebody who speaks for mainstream conservatives. And I don't say people portray him as a moderate because he was on the wrong side of Trump once upon a time. He's not. He's a conservative. And voices like his stepping up are very important nationwide. And we've got to have those people continue to speak up, because what's happened here is a real break with tradition in the House. You don't bring in the opposition party to help you out. That is not how it goes. The majority caucus governs by itself. You have to seek consensus within it. That's no longer possible. And so we're having to break the way the House has worked for many generations. So does it hold? I don't know. I think another tight margin in 24, Republican or Democrat, you may see this consensus approach moving forward. Of course, Hakeem Jeffries is going to have a different playbook than Mike Johnson, but because the Democrats, I'll say, like under Pelosi, the Democrats kind of keep their troops in order. The squad goes a little nuts, and then Pelosi has to go out there. She would go and jerk their necks around a little bit.
Doesn't go that far, right?
Yeah,
right.
But she had a steel hand.
And
we haven't had a steel hand in a long time. Probably since Tom DeLay was majority leader.
That takes me back, Lisa. B-Rob knows this. I was on the front line of trying to get John Barrow. Shout out to my good friend John Barrow, who's on the ballot coming up May 21st. But he was running for Congress then, and Tom DeLay was just vicious. I mean, as B-Rob mentioned, he was raising millions and millions of dollars to take out Democrats. But no, to wrap this up, listen, Lisa, I would say this from a Democratic perspective. It's chess, not checkers. We've got to make sure that the American people see that we are working with this speaker, Speaker Johnson, to try to bring some governing back to the House. However, you listen to what Geoff Duncan said. I know we haven't talked about him yet, but he was very clear most recently. While he's encouraging people to vote for Joe Biden, there's still that underlining sort of tone there. The Republicans, if Joe Biden wins back the White House and we win the House, they do want to try to put up a sort of firewall to not let Democrats sort of have the House of Representatives if we were to, win the White House. And so while there is this kumbaya spirit right now, I predict that next year, probably this time, when Joe Biden is reelected and if we're not able to win the House of Representatives back, then you'll see a lot of these Republicans sort of go back to some of their old ways.
All right. You kind of led us into our next snippet with John Barrow. You mentioned John Barrow, and he is centering his campaign for a seat on the Georgia Supreme Court around abortion rights. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are crying foul. What are your thoughts on that, Brian? Pick it up from there. Is he breaking any rules and
yes.
And should he stop?
Yes, and yes. His signs say vote for choice. Now, that is a clear reference to the abortion issue, which is obviously moving through the judiciary across the country. And the judicial standards of conduct don't let you campaign on issues. You can campaign on, your resume, where you went to college, what clubs you're a member of, like the conservatives talk about being members of the Federalist Society, et cetera. But you can't run saying how you were going to respond to cases that may come before the court. That has never been acceptable, and it makes it impossible to have a nonpartisan judiciary if people are out campaigning on partisan issues. And this one is one. So Andrew Pinson, who is the incumbent state Supreme Court justice, is fighting back on this issue and is filed a complaint. And how that case unfolds will play a major role in how judicial races are fought for years to come, because if John Barrow prevails here, we will never have another nonpartisan race for judiciary ever again. It's going to force people to say how they would vote on death penalty cases, for example, how they would approach crime. You're going to see people out there promising to put away criminals forever, right? This tough on crime approach, because you can't be seen as a moderate on any of these issues in a judicial race. And the rules are there to prevent people from doing just that, from putting themselves in a corner in a way that hurts law and order, in a way that hurts the, judiciary's role in our democracy. So John Barrow has got us on a slippery slope here. I hope that the panel that looks at this puts a stop to it.
Well, full disclosure, Lisa, I'm a huge John Barrow fan. Not only did I work for him when we made history in Georgia by beating incumbent Max Burns. This is back when, just to let our listeners know, when Democrats had power, we had very strong leadership in the governor's mansion, and it was a democratically drawn district that Max Burns was able to surprise the country. I mean, this was the number one seat in the country for Democrats to win, and it was sort of hijacked by a Republican, Max Burns, who, by the way, now is in the state Senate and has, done a really good job being a state senator. So I go all the way back to the 90s with John Barrow when he was my county commissioner in Athens, Georgia. So the reason I'm kind of setting it up this way, Lisa, is not only is this man a very skilled politician who survived the attacks from Republicans when they redrew his district almost a half a dozen times, but he's a very, very smart man and a very, very talented lawyer. I believe, and I have not talked to John about this, and I'm glad he hasn't called me for any money, because Laura knows a lot of us knows that JB is, other than Roy Barnes, is one of the top fundraisers in our state, and Stacey Abrams and Warnock, of course, and Ossoff. But before they were those, Stacey Abrams and Warnock and Ossoff, I mean, John Barrow is just a beast on the phones. So what I'm about to say about him is that let's not rush to judgment. There is going to be a hearing. The courts will have to decide whether or not what John is doing is wrong. And so for our listeners, don't let Brian tell you that this is a bad man. He's a boogeyman. No, he's pushing the court to make a decision. And I think that he's doing the right thing by putting the issue and the crisis that we have in this country, particularly in this state, around reproductive freedom, around a woman's right to choose and abortion, right? And that is something that I want to applaud John for doing, because I know his heart. I know this man. I know how he's had to make some tough choices when he ran in a very conservative district. And he is someone who has not only served in Congress, served on the local level as a county commission, but I think that he would be a great, great person that's the position that he's running for. And so, I don't know much about, Judge Pinson, but I do know that I don't think that John Barrow will go out here and campaign on this issue the way that he's campaigning, Lisa, and not have studied the law, not have studied what he's able to do and not to do. Now, again, this decision is going to come down pretty close to Election Day. And so how it affects his campaign, how it affects his fundraising, how it affects turnout, we'll wait and see. But I do think that he's very credible.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Mr. Barrow filed a federal lawsuit last week, I believe, to block the state's judicial watchdog agency from seeking misconduct charges against him for, focusing his campaigin, basically his entire campaign, on abortion rights. So
that's right. And I get it politically. I understand what he's trying to do. I just don't think it's legal. I understand. I don't think he's making a lawyer's reasoned argument. I think he is making a political play. And frankly, he wants to have these suits. He wants to, because the suits are going to get media attention, to draw eyes to his position on the abortion issue. And then he wants me and Tharon and others on the air talking about it, right? It's all part of a big political play. It makes a lot of sense from that score. But
Andrew politics. Wow.
Andrew Pinson is a really good man, too. Just so you know, he's a really good man. Kemp appointee, was Solicitor General of the state, highly accomplished, wicked smart, by all accounts. And it's really hard to play by the rules when the other guy isn't. What if Andrew Pinson went and campaigned on promising to overturn any conviction in the Trump case being done by Fani Willis? That's next, my friends. If this stands, that sort of politics in a judicial race is next.
Well, look, let me say this. I hear good things about Justice Pinson. He's got some Democrats that are close to me that are supporting him, right? But on this one, I think John Barrow was right to file this lawsuit, Lisa. I mean, again, he's and Brian won't disagree with this. There's not a smarter person in politics who is a lawyer, trained and smart than John Barrow. So again, I go back to, yes, he's accomplished his goal. We are talking about him on the Political Breakfast podcast. And hopefully that's not going to cost me as much money as I think it will cost me. But, I think that John is definitely, he's a skilled politician. This is a statewide race. I mean, and he has been in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. A lot of blogs are talking about him. I know that he's running a grassroots campaign. And look, I mean, he's got some support on the Republican side, too. I mean, again, this is a man who was elected numerous times for correct me if I'm wrong, B-Rob, for I think like 2 year stint. He was the only white Democrat elected in the South. Right, like
he was the last white Democrat in the House in the South.
Last white Democrat elected in the South. And so this guy knows how to reach across the aisle. I think he can bring people together. And again, I think that he truly cares about this issue. This is just not some political stunt to get podcasts like ours to talk about him or, drum up, some earned media. I truly believe that he's going to be able to defend himself. And correct me if I'm wrong, lastly, Lisa, I don't think that, nothing against Justice Pinson. Here's a good man. A lot of my friends are supporting him. But I think he hasn't debated John, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean,
right.
Let's have a debate. I mean, is he's wicked smart, as B. Rob says? I put my money on JB because I've had to debate him and I've had to negotiate with him. And I think he's a pretty damn good debater and a pretty damn good former politician that I think is going to really, look at sort of seeing if he can serve Georgia again.
Yeah. On the debate, very quickly, what Pinson is saying is, I'm not going to debate somebody who's not playing by the rules. And so I can't be there on the podium where this guy is saying how he's going to rule on issues, and I am playing by the rules and can't do it. It really ties his hands. That's his argument. Take it or leave it, but we can move on from there.
Another name floating around today is former Republican Lieutenant Governor Geoff Duncan, who has endorsed President Joe Biden's reelection campaign. What does that do in the scheme of things for him long term if he seeks office again, whether he identifies with the GOP or not? Where does this put Geoff Duncan on the map after that endorsement?
It's very difficult to stay in the GOP tent and be endorsing the other party's nominee. When you do that, you really do shut that door, and you shut the door to your future in the party. So I do think that this move is much bigger than the ones he's had in the past. And he has broken with the party for years now, but you can't walk this one back. And whatever his hopes for the GOP 2.0, I don't think that can move forward at this juncture. Not that it was even before this, but this just absolutely slams shut any opportunity for that. One thing that Geoff has done here is leave himself in no man's land. Yes, he can go spend the next year, this year being a surrogate for Biden. He may even get a speaking slot at the DNC convention. In fact, I would be shocked if he doesn't. Everybody loves to have this voice from the other party come out there and speak for their nominee. But there's nothing beyond that for him. Democrats aren't going to take him into the fold. He doesn't have a home there either. I mean, this is somebody who last week on the Bulwark podcast, and by the way, I do recommend Lisa and Tharon that people listening to that, because Geoff did a pretty good job of laying out his case in that podcast with Tim Miller. But he goes to talk about how he's for the heartbeat bill, for example, some very conservative legislation. Democrats want nothing to do with people who believe what Geoff Duncan believes in. He is a conservative Republican. So he's now just in this no man's land. I don't know how you crawl out of that. I mean, you can go and be a talking head on CNN and all that. And if that's an end unto itself, that's great. But there's not a political end here for him as far as elected office is concerned.
You know, head to the Democratic side, Tharon.
They don't want him. They don't want him.
Well, hold on, B. Rob. I've slept on this. Okay, so as B. Rob talked about, this news broke last week, Lisa, and we were talking about it on Friday, but we were at the Kettering event, and so I've slept on it over the weekend, B. Rob, because I was very cautious to embrace it totally, but also I didn't dismiss it. And so, look. Let's just frame this for our listeners, right? Brian told you who Geoff Duncan is, right? Guy who, and I encourage people. I don't know this other podcast B. Rob just mentioned. I don't get into business of promoting other people's podcasts unless I'm gonna get monetized for it. But no, but our friends over at Politically Georgia also interviewed him as well, and I listened to the entire podcast as I was driving to Athens to see my mom. And he did exactly what Brian talked about, Lisa. He did not abandon his conservative views, but what he said was, I think, was so poignant. He said, look, Joe Biden is a good guy. He's a decent guy versus a criminal defendant. All right. And to me, I've been trying to sort of talk to these white men and white women, particularly in the Republican Party, that are sensible to say, to me, I think he framed it the right way. We got a man who's in the White House, who has integrity, who's trying to lead this country the right way, who's trying to bring everyone together versus, and this is his words, a criminal defendant. And he used the two words porn star. I mean, he said whether or not he did this and did that with a porn star. And so the other thing that I think that he really said, and I think we can't be tricked, right? It's a trick pony. He's saying, look, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden, but he did not in any way back down from his conservative views. I mean, this was a lieutenant governor who was viewed as one of the most conservative lieutenant governors at that time, heartbeat bill, but he also worked across the aisle. And I've said this before, and I'm not backing down on it. I still think he's going to run for president of the United States of America. He's got to believe, B-Rob, that there's some other path. Now, if he runs a Democrat or runs a Republican, we'll have to wait and see. So what he's also done is that he's turned the GOP 2.0 into a 501c4 organization, Lisa. So you don't start changing up the IRS status of your organization unless you're going to use it for something. So here's how I think this plays out with Geoff Duncan. I think whether or not Geoff Duncan speaks at the convention, that's left up to my good friend Jamie Harrison of the DNC. And when asked that question, he wouldn't answer it. He wouldn't say yes or no. Would he do it? He said, I haven't had a chance to really think about it. So Democrats, we got to be very careful. We put him up on the stage. How does that fit into us persuading enough voters to come over to the Democratic Party and vote for Joe Biden? And then is Geoff Duncan that person? The other thing that I wasn't surprised about is that you saw the GOP chair and the current Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones just go after him. I mean, aggressively, right? And so, B-Rob probably asked this. I don't really hear the fallback. Like, this is what I didn't hear. I didn't hear the amount of just huge criticism against Geoff Duncan the way that I've heard from other people when they sort of say, hey, I'm going to vote for the Democrat. And then lastly, I feel good about it, Lisa, because whether or not how we use him, whether or not he continues to be supportive of the president. You got a first lady of the state of Georgia, Marty Kemp, and now a former lieutenant governor who, yes, is on CNN, who, yes, has written a book, who, yes, I think is still ambitious, saying, I am not voting for Trump. So I've got to believe that there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, hopefully millions, but hundreds of thousands of other Republicans out there that are thinking the same thing that Geoff Duncan, our former lieutenant governor, and our current first lady, Marty Kemp, are thinking. Now, whether it translates into them actually voting for Joe Biden and persuading others to vote for Joe Biden, I think that's going to be left up to the Biden campaign and how they utilize that support.
No, Geoff is and has long been a friend, and he's a good man, and I do think that he is doing what he thinks is right here. Tharon referenced Burt Jones, the current lieutenant governor's comments on this, and I don't want to leave people in the dark as to what Tharon was talking about. Burt Jones's quote was, "Every village has a useful idiot. I guess the Democrat Party has found theirs." So
I said it was harsh. I didn't want to go there, B-Rob. No, I think kids listen to this show. You remind me, kids listen to this show too, but that was a little harsh.
Yeah, it was harsh.
What did the chairman say? What did the GOP chairman say? What's his name? Josh McCoon?
I don't know. I didn't see Josh's quotes.
Oh, yeah, he went pretty hard too. I can't remember exactly what it was, but he just pretty much disowned him.
Yeah, and look, and that's where this puts Geoff. It puts him in a place where people who have known him, who have worked with him, who may have a positive impression of him as a person, now, for partisan reasons, must be harsh when talking about him, because if you aren't harsh, you're sending a signal to your constituency, to your voters, that you're weak on these issues or you're soft on these issues. And you just can't be that when you are a Republican who's one day going to face a primary. And so if you get asked about him, you got to go out there swinging hard. And that's what we're seeing here.
Well, B-Rob, real quick, I definitely agree with you. Geoff Duncan's a good man. I've met with him a few times. I actually, can text him, and, we've actually broke bread together. So good man. But let's also put this in perspective. Geoff Duncan is independently wealthy. So you don't go out here and do the things that he's been doing. You don't decide not to run for a second term. And he has been critical of Donald Trump for a long time. I mean, for a long time there, B-Rob, he was the only Georgia Republican that would criticize the former president. So I think his wealth and it's independent, right? So he don't need politics, and I think he can self-fund is also got to be a part of his calculation. And I think, Brian, when you talk to him, I mean, I heard him on a podcast. He believes that there are other Republicans out there that are like him, and they're just scared to speak up. I just really think that has the Republican Party in Georgia gotten to a point where, and I've said this, is either you're with Donald Trump or you're against him. And I guess what I'm hearing you say is that it's going to be very difficult for him to win a primary because of what he's done, because a lot of people probably won't forgive him. But I do think that let's see how this thing turns out, because Geoff Duncan, if he's right, and he's got this 2.0, he's got books, and he does have that platform of CNN. That's what he talked a lot about, his platform, utilizing his platform. I mean, I think he may still be relevant in Georgia politics going forward.
Yeah, he hasn't gone away yet.
But there's no primary here he can win. He cannot win a GOP primary. He cannot win a Democratic primary. He's in no man's land.
So you think, okay, let me ask you this real quick, B-Rob. If Donald Trump loses, you think that there's no way that Geoff Duncan, if Donald Trump loses, that can come back and win a Georgia Republican primary?
I do not. No.
Wow. Okay.
No, I don't. And I feel confident on that because it's just like, you're not on the team. I didn't like Trump either, but you needed to shut up. And you got to. I think part of what y'all don't see that I see from being in Republican politics is how much the Republican base hates Joe Biden. I don't know that comes in front of your eyes as much as it does with me. That, and the idea that he's senile and incapable and how much they hate Kamala Harris. So I think endorsing that ticket in their mind, even if they don't like Trump, is kind of a death wish within the party. Yeah. So
those are personal issues that they don't like the president, and we don't have enough time on this podcast to talk about why white Republicans don't like Kamala Harris. I think I can, do that. But there's nothing with his governing, you think, as much as it is that they just think he's old, and these are your words, he's senile, and what else?
Yeah.
I mean, that's it.
No, they don't think the country's going in the right direction either. They blame him for inflation, the crime that we had post-COVID, all of that stuff, right? It's pretty typical partisan viewpoints. But I'll say it's not just us. I mean, you think Dean Phillips or RFK is going to have a future in the Democratic Party? No, they are dead to those people. They are dead to the base of the Democratic Party. They hate Dean Phillips. They hate RFK.
But the party almost abandoned Raffensperger. At one point, he's still hanging in there. He's still hanging in there. So,
reader, Lisa. I'm sorry. Think
this
about
remains
it.
to be seen.
It's a guy named Brad Raffensperger. Brian, who you know better than anybody.
Isolated.
He survived it. Now, here's the question. I know we don't have enough time. Is Geoff Duncan's endorsement and voting for Joe Biden worse than Brad Raffensperger on multiple calls, not just one call that we only heard, refusing to grant the former president's wish by overturning democracy and breaking the law? I mean, if Brad Raffensperger can get reelected with the percentages that he got and still be mentioned, Lisa, right now, he's in the equation for a potential gubernatorial candidate.
And embraced now.
Right?
Yeah, because at one point he was just, in a lonely room.
But don't forget about Geoff Duncan's hair. Don't forget about the hair, y'all.
The hair's great.
The
That's
hair,
a huge asset.
And Lisa's smiling.
And the women love him.
And the women love him. If you got women in hair,
Jeff.
you got women in hair, there's nothing you can't do in this country, Brian. I'm telling you.
Well, Tharon used to get mad at me for talking about politicians' hair, but I stand by it. It makes a difference.
Yeah.
Can you imagine how successful I could be if I had some hair, Brian?
I wouldn't know.
Boy, you couldn't tell me nothing.
On that note, Tharon Johnson is a Democratic strategist, public affairs and government consultant, and most recently a senior advisor to the Biden Georgia campaign. Brian Robinson is a Republican strategist, communications consultant, and former deputy chief of staff for Governor Nathan Deal. Good talking to you guys. We have one more to do this week, so we'll meet up again soon.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.